Happy birthday, GDP. The term gross national product is 80 today. We ask whether it's still an important measure of the economy. And 28 economists share their forecast for the Eurozone economy in 2014. Is the economic crisis really over? Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm MARYAM MOSHIRI. Now, let's talk about GDP because it's a measure of human progress. It's one of the ways in which we measure that. And for economists, gross domestic product, the sum total of consumption, investment, exports in any country is important. And it's really been the only way to compare the relative performance of countries from developing nations like the US. The term was first introduced 80 years ago today, but is it really still the best way to define how we're getting on? BBC's Caroline Hepker reports.
Gross domestic product isn't just a number, it's been a great leap forward. It was created originally as gross national product in 1934 by this man, Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets. Why? Because the Great Depression made US policymakers realise they needed better information to deal with a national disaster. GDP painstakingly adds up all the output of people, companies and governments in one country. The idea was swiftly adopted around the world, and over the decades it has helped governments to stimulate growth, battle inflation and increase trade. But GDP has not been without its critics. In 1972, the King of Bhutan adopted gross national happiness as a more holistic measure of the progress of his Himalayan people. And in 1990, the UN came up with a broader Human Development Index that takes into account factors like health, education and gender equality. And yet still, Professor Kuznets' GDP remains the granddaddy, perhaps one of the 20th century's greatest inventions.
Well, with me is Justin Stewart, Director of Seven Investment Management, to talk about this. Justin, GDP, is it an outdated method of understanding progress within an economy?
Well, I suppose it's better than nothing. It's a measure, but like all these things, you've got to have a level of consistency over time to see how it's changing. But it is notoriously inefficient. And certainly in the United Kingdom, we have here snapshots. Most countries have initial snapshots, and they get changed very dramatically quite often over a period of months and years, which can distort the attitude. Remember, there's one word that actually runs an economy, and that is confidence. So if the GDP is giving us a wrong indicator, so really, rather than actually talking about the expenditure of what's going on, it'd be much more efficient to actually look at consumption. The consumption of what consumers are actually using and needing every single time. That's a far better measure as to actually what's going on. So really, actually looking at it, it's relatively inefficient.
Do you think that policymakers rely too much on GDP when they're deciding on what to do next or where to take the economy?
Oh, hugely. And you only have to look at this from the central bankers as to what they do. The slightest hint that GDP is going one way or another. In fact, the central bankers are probably slightly better at it. The politicians are worse because they'll react immediately. And again, forgive me for being domestic about it, but last year we had the United Kingdom, there was a threat of a triple-dip recession, and everyone was talking about that for some time, which never happened, because when you actually looked at the data, which again was pretty inaccurate data, not only did it not happen, it was giving us the wrong indicator for probably most of the year.
Well, you talked about consumption and how that's more important than production. What about things like happiness, gender equality, wage growth? How important are those things in measuring a country's progress?
It's very difficult to get anything consistent. Things like happiness, for example, what actually makes people happy. It sounds like a nice measure, but actually is notoriously difficult. In terms of gender equality, that's a very interesting measure to see the different involvements of the sexes and how they're changing and adjusting over time. That's certainly very helpful. But really what you need to do is the economy actually now consuming more stuff? And you can measure that over time, and that gives you a better, longer-term picture as to actually what's going on.
OK, Justin, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've entered the new year, and the BBC has asked 28 leading economists about their forecast for the state of the European economy in 2014. When asked about economic growth in the Eurozone, 26% thought it would be 1.1%. But interestingly, 19% thought it would be as low as 0.5% or less. But maybe the most surprising is that half of the respondents say the crisis in the Eurozone isn't over. And many of those who thought it was still say the situation is critical and could flare up again. Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined down the line by Alan Clark, UK and Eurozone economist at Scotiabank, one of the economists who actually took part in this. He joins us from our Cambridge studio. Good to talk to you, Alan. Let's start off talking about this interesting fact. Half the people asked, the economists asked, believed the crisis was over. Half didn't. I mean, it's quite balanced, isn't it? Where does the truth lie? It's quite difficult to know.
Well, it is. I think we are past the worst. We've seen sentiment improving significantly, both on the consumer side and the business side. Interest rates are, particularly for the most fiscally challenged economies, they've come down. So I think we are past the worst, but these things can flare up at any time without warning. So it's too soon to relax.
Let's talk about the forecast for growth, because 63% of those who were questioned said the economy in the Eurozone would grow by 0.8 to 1.1% in 2014. I mean, that doesn't really tally with it, does it, with what we know already or what we think we know already?
Well, we know the Eurozone economy probably shrank by around 0.5% during 2013. I agree with the majority. I think we'll expand by close to 1% during 2014. But you compare it to the UK, this time a year ago, the consensus for growth was 1%, and now we're looking at closer to 2%. So this measure can be quite volatile. It's a bit more steady in the Eurozone. I think we're seeing the periphery economies, Italy and Spain, starting to move in the right direction. They're not booming, but at least they're not shrinking as much as they were. But you still have the problem child of Europe at the moment is France, where its survey indicators are a bit more downbeat, and it may struggle to grow in the year-end period.
I mean, how difficult is it if you ask an economist to start looking into the future and into a crystal ball, if you like, and working out what's going to happen and what's not? How difficult is it to get things right? Do you remember what you said about 2013? Did that come true?
I do remember 2013, I mean, particularly for the UK, and sort of surprises come along. Like the Help to Buy scheme was an absolute game changer and saw sentiment surge. I mean, we can still remember, probably not much more than 9 months ago, you could have argued for zero growth in the UK, but that scheme came along and it changed everything. Very unlikely you get anything like that in the Eurozone, but when you're probably one of the big themes for this year is going to be risk of deflation in the Eurozone. So why not think outside the box and do something radical like that? Because it's worked in the UK, why not think about doing something like that in the Eurozone? People could argue that too much borrowing and too much reliance on housing got us into the crisis in the first place. But look at the turnaround in the UK. You've got growth, you've got big falls in the unemployment rate, sentiment's up. I think something along those lines would be quite worthwhile trying.
OK, Alan Clark, always good to get your views. Thank you very much indeed. Now, some news from Walmart. It's recalled donkey meat sold at some of their outlets in China after tests reportedly showed it contained fox meat, which is cheaper. Let's talk to Sharanjit Lail, who is in our Asia Business Hub. Sharanjit, a pretty sordid story this, selling meat that is wrongly labelled.
That's right, MARYAM. Well, as I can tell you, it's just about lunchtime here in Singapore. It's very squeamish and certainly making me very squeamish. But essentially, this is Walmart saying now that it's going to reimburse its customers who bought the brand of donkey meat. It's called Five Spice. And they also say they're helping local food and industry agencies in the eastern Shandong province investigate its Chinese supplier. Donkey meat is eaten in some parts of China. Of course, this is quite the reverse of the scandal that emerged in Europe just a few months ago when beef products were found to contain horse and donkey meat. In China, it's actually a popular snack, would you believe? Now, food safety, of course, a really sensitive issue in this country. We've got lots of recent scares. It's undermined consumer confidence in the whole food supply chain there. And of course, aside from the fatal tainted milk scandal some years ago, police in China more recently made arrests last year for passing off rat and fox as beef and mutton. Now, Walmart is taking action to reassure their shoppers. They're setting up a team to investigate the incident, and they're also strengthening their food safety rules. They intend to take legal action as well against the supplier of the tainted donkey meat. And the chief executive of Walmart's Chinese operations essentially saying that this is a huge, big lesson for them. They'll need to continue to increase investment in their supplier management.
OK, Sharanjit, enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much indeed. That's it from me and the team. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.